humblemud.
Earlier this year, I started narrowing in on a particular console from the 5th generation that I ended up developing quite a fascination with, and that's the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer.
Presenting 3DO, the most advanced home gaming system in the universe. It's time to put away your toys.
What initially started all of this was a desire to try Road Rash for the 3DO, thanks in large part to Sega Lord X's wonderful videos covering that game. After I saw for myself just how awesome Road Rash is on my Retroid Pocket, I had to explore the rest of the library. The console definitely has some gems, and while not all of its games were hits for me, doing this 3DO deep dive led me to a game that stands alongside Yakuza Kiwami, The Dead Rising remake, and Batman Arkham Asylum as one of my favorite gaming experiences I've had so far this year. I truly believe that had this game received a proper port to a more popular console like the PS1 or even the Sega Saturn, you'd see it everywhere in hidden gem and cult classic videos today. I'm talking about Immercenary, combat in a digital world.
Wake up! Wake up!
Immercenary is a 1995 psychedelic sci-fi open-world first-person shooter RPG developed by 5 Miles Out and published by Electronic Arts. And it's quite unlike any other console game that's out there, especially back then. For the sake of this video, I'm going to skip over some of the specifics here when it comes to the plot, but essentially you play as Agent Number 5, tasked with the mission of hacking into this virtual reality world from the future. You're doing this because a mysterious woman from this future timeline reached out to your team, explaining that critical bugs in this virtual world server cause its users to become trapped within it. This will eventually result in lots of deaths, since, people have to eat, but they aren't able to exit this virtual reality once they're in it. This world, ironically known as Perfect, has transformed into a virtual hellscape where people are killing each other left and right. And the only way to stop all of this is to climb through the ranks of this vicious dog-eat-dog world yourself and defeat the system's operator, known as the Perfect One, so you can shut the whole thing down before it can alter your present timeline. And you'll learn pretty quickly from the opening cutscene that whatever happens in this virtual world can have grave effects on you as a person, considering that Agent Number 4 right before you died in real life due to something that took place while he was in there. Accepting the risks and the task at hand, you strap yourself in, prepared as much as anyone could be to step into this unknown, dangerous world.
We haven't determined what happened yet, but be careful in this area. This is where we lost contact with Number 4. I think they're ready whenever you are. Good luck, Number 5.
Now, before we really get in there and talk about that world, let me address one little quirk about this game that I'm sure plenty of you noticed already. Yes, like many games on the 3DO, Immercenary has some full motion video or FMV cutscenes. Brief little history lesson for you: considering the quick advancements in technologies at this time, video game companies in the 90s were in an absolute arms race to try to determine what the future of gaming would look like, what the next thing would be. While we now know that it ended up being relatively rudimentary polygonal 3D games that eventually became more graphically sophisticated over time, back then there was a substantial population of people that thought what could be more graphically impressive than actual footage of real places and people. Of course now we can clearly see why this wasn't the answer, but if you go back and think about all of the digitized or pre-rendered graphics utilized in games like Mortal Kombat 2, Primal Rage, Killer Instinct, or Donkey Kong Country in the 90s, and how that style really was the it thing for a time, it makes sense why some thought FMV would be the future. By and large, FMV games flopped horrendously, but in Immercenary's case, I think the FMV cutscenes actually worked for getting, well, immersed in this game because the FMV scenes are so clearly distinct from the virtual world that you'll find yourself in. Yeah, the acting is corny and the costumes look like they're from the budget section of Spirit Halloween, but that's part of the charm, and I kind of like the comic cutaway style that they go for. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about this virtual world and the gameplay. From the moment you drop into Perfect, which, by the way, is going to be at a random location every time you do drop in, you'll notice that this game is much different tonally than its contemporary shooter cousins of the time. Spawning in, there's a sense of disorientation, of confusion, of not knowing what's around the corner. It's even a little scary at times. It's clear that this world is not as perfect as its name would imply that it is. It almost feels like an unfinished beta game world of sorts. There is confusing geometry everywhere and a mishmash of structures that don't belong together. In one moment, you may be walking next to apartment buildings complete with pixelated fire escapes on the side, and in the next block, you'll find a giant pyramid. There are buildings that resemble something like a rad arcade, and then there's a building that is nothing but faces. There are odd parks with ponds that seem to pull the game's denizens into its watery depths. Graveyards. You'll see familiar things like parking meters, and then you'll see demented, devilish-looking buildings. It's all extremely surreal and eerie, but as you spend more time here, it begins to feel familiar. The game world starts to make sense despite it being the furthest thing from harmonious or cohesive. Before you can realistically take any of this in, though, you're likely going to die.
Number 5. Can you hear me?
And that's because when you start this game, you're extremely weak in addition to being disoriented. On top of that, you've got to keep in mind that everyone else has the same goal that you do. They're trying to rise through the ranks as well so that they can figure out how to get out of here, meaning there is violence all around you. Nowhere feels safe, but there is one safe area. You know how in RuneScape you were generally safe from other players unless you went into the wilderness where player killing is a thing? Well, in Immercenary, there's a safe haven called the Oasis, and that's where you can go to avoid player killing. That's right, this little dot right here is the one safe area. Everywhere else is basically Immercenary's wilderness. Now, I don't know if you caught it earlier, but I didn't say the Oasis, I said DOasis. It's called that because DOA is the hokey pokey of Immercenary. DOA is what it's all about. It stands for defense, offense, and agility, and those three stats are represented in the life bars up top. If you run out of the yellow defense bar, you'll crash and temporarily log out to go back to the lab. If you run out of the red offense bar, you can no longer attack. And if you run out of agility, you will slow down to a screeching halt. You can increase your DOA stats by taking down other beings in this world. You can also lose those stats if you crash too many times. In fact, getting your defense all the way to 0 will result in a game over, and I'd imagine you'll probably encounter the same fate as Agent 4. Anyways, when you defeat these enemies called rhythms, they'll leave behind a sort of staticky essence that you can absorb. And as you may guess, defeating these yellow ones here builds XP for your defense, red ones give offensive XP, green ones give agility experience, and the gray ones will give you a little experience for all three stats. The other thing to pay attention to is your rank. You can think of this almost like your overall level in a typical RPG. You start at rank 255, and as you can imagine, the in-game boss, Perfect One, is rank 1. And just so you know, no, thankfully you don't have to level up all the way to rank 2 to beat the game. I think I cleared it at around 148 myself. But all of these common rhythms you see here are rank 256, so you're not actually going to rank up if you defeat them. They're basically the Goombas of Immercenary. These particular rhythms are actually called goners, which is some fun wordplay on the fact that they're both polygonal beings, and they also basically stand no chance in this world. No, these guys won't help you rank up and find Perfect One. You'll have to defeat stronger enemies of a higher rank than that of yours in order to rank up yourself. Picassos will likely be the first enemy you'll take on after you've defeated a handful of goners and raised your stats a bit. Picassos, obviously named after the famous painter, are really interesting two-dimensional foes. When they turn just right, they're perfectly flat, so you'll have to manually aim at them instead of relying on your auto-targeting systems like you can with the goners. And fair warning, they can do a lot of damage and sometimes travel in packs. However, when you defeat your very first one and hear that really unique dying sound that they they make as they fade from existence, and of course rank up for the first time. Man, is that a good feeling. And one more thing of note, while the goners don't help you rank up, they never stop being useful to kill because they always contribute to giving you XP for your DOA stats. So if you haven't figured it out yet, the most optimal gameplay loop you're likely going to find is camping outside the ring of the oasis like a PKer would do inside the tree line of RuneScape's wilderness. You'll run around taking down goners and absorbing their essences until you eventually deplete your stats and rush back to the oasis to replenish them. It's here where you can also talk to other players and avatars within the oasis to learn about the world and its inhabitants. Even the game's bosses can be found here sometimes. It's really cool. Once you feel confident enough in your stats, maybe you'll venture out a little further, get a couple Picasso kills under your belt and rank up, then start exploring even more, maybe utilizing some tips you got from users in the Oasis to find secret items or power-ups so that you can take on even stronger foes. Hopefully, you'll eventually find the boomerang, which is sort of the closest thing you can get to a shotgun in this game. It looks almost like you're throwing a bowler wrap at your enemies, but as the name boomerang implies, it does come back to hit the enemy from behind if it doesn't kill them, and it will pull them closer to you. You'll also find single-use items like the PIMS, for example, also known as Perfect Emergency Medical Service, which is essentially a virtual ambulance that will pick you up and whisk you away straight to the Oasis. Obviously, this is super helpful to use when you're near death and far away from safety. Of course, you could only get so far if you could only rely on the Oasis, and so there are thankfully spires everywhere that you can park underneath and replenish your stats. They're color-coded, so yellow gives defense and red gives attack similar to goners, while blue will give you just a smidge of everything. Fair warning though, you're always going to take a risk when you're staying still, and also be wary of those dark skies because whenever there's a thunderstorm going on, the spires go offline. If you run out of agility, the only way to replenish this is to stop moving. The good thing is you can do this anywhere. The bad thing is you leave yourself vulnerable to all of the hostiles around you. And as you can maybe guess, there will be lots of moments where you push your luck just a little too much and catch yourself desperately trying to zigzag back to the Oasis while your defense is nearly broken and your agility is running on fumes. And let me tell you, there is nothing better than hearing that angelic music when you successfully make it back to that inner circle and your stats heal back up. All of this creates a deceptively fun gameplay loop once you get the hang of it and understand what you're doing. And even after the most risky run you've ever ran, you'll feel a strong urge to run out there just one more time just to see how far you can get. Though maybe consider saving the game while you're in the Oasis first. Considering that this is a D-pad based FPS game before the time of dual analog sticks, I think Immercenary controls quite well. Gobbling up enemies to increase your stats never stops being fun. The stereo sound is really good and gives you a great sense of where the enemies around you are. And of course, with a world this big, there is a lot of exploration to do. Now, I don't want to walk through every boss fight and spoil a whole bunch of things for you, but there are 10 champions in this game, ranked 10 and up of course. You can fight them in any order you choose, they all have different abilities, and they all provide quite a challenge. Tesla, for example, and yeah, I realize that's kind of an interesting and slightly eerie name in 2025, is essentially the Amazing Spider-Man movie's take on Electro. There's a boss made of ribbons who bounces around all over the place and is really hard to target, a flying mosquito woman who can disorient your vision, a man who can turn himself invisible, and so on. And yeah, again, I know these costumes aren't the best, but just let your imagination do some work here. Defeating these champions will not only result in a major rank up, but they will also be the key to tearing down the world of perfect and making your way to the perfect one. But of course you'll have to scrap around in the game world for a bit before you can take on any of them. While the initial climb up the ranks can be somewhat difficult, you'll probably find that, especially after acquiring some better abilities and getting your DOA stats up, you'll start steamrolling this game. Going in blind with substantially less information than what I've even given you in this video so far, it took me about 30 minutes to rank up from 255 to 254, just because I didn't know what I was doing. However, I made sure to write down that during that same night, I also got from rank 245 to 223 in 12 minutes. That's roughly a rank a minute. And that's because as you progress, the game starts to populate the world with stronger enemies that will help you rank up faster. You get stronger, so you defeat enemies quicker. Your agility levels are higher so you can venture out further and find where certain enemies spawn, and so on. A couple play sessions later, I was around rank 170, 180 when I defeated the rank 10 boss, and I beat another one that same night. By rank 156, I defeated the rank 6 boss fair and square with just my blaster, which I'm very proud of since a lot of guides say that boss is pretty tough, and at 155 I found the game's ultimate weapon, which is in a random location deep within the game's map. I thought maybe I'll take on the rank 5 champion and call it a night, but I ended up embarking on a boss rush killing spree, and late into the night I beat the game in its entirety much sooner than I anticipated. And honestly, finishing Immercenary left me with a tinge of loss, especially after days of thinking about this game and its weird world while I was at work. One thing I caught myself thinking about a lot was the developmental progression of the game's enemy designs. At the bottom of the totem pole, you've got basic polygonal forms barely representing that of a human, to art with a touch of soul in its design, to more complex avatars closer resembling the human form, to the David rhythm with a whole universe inside of him named after the perfect real-life statue, and finally the boss characters that often augment themselves with things to push them past the limitations of the human body. I started theory crafting on how perhaps the different forms of avatars that you meet in this game might be visual representations of humanity's desire to move towards perfection or the divine or to go back to nature or something else entirely. And even at the lowest level of this game, you stand a chance of running into any of these enemies in the overworld or in the Oasis. I thought about how oddly relevant the messages this game carries about the dangers of technology are today, where people are blindly and unknowingly being exposed to AI on a daily basis, and where technology moguls at the top are trying to make escaping to the metaverse and relying entirely on automated technology normal. I started thinking about how interesting this world was, how I wished it had gotten a second chance at life on the PlayStation 1. I imagined a more fleshed out sequel to this game that would have fit perfectly on a beautifully strange and forward-thinking console like the Dreamcast. And what if a new entry in the Immercenary series had continued on the Xbox 360 at the height of Xbox Live? Imagine the online gameplay, playing a game that was essentially doing Battle Royale style play before that was even a trend. I just imagine the scenario where you're trying to take someone down only to find that they popped a PIMS that they found right before you got that final shot in, and as they warp back to the safety of the Oasis, voices both laughing and complaining erupt in your gaming headset. All of the in-between gaming I was doing with Immercenary, the unique thoughts it started making me think, the genuine immersion I felt playing this game, all of it suddenly ended as I unexpectedly found myself taking down Perfect One herself later that night. And I wasn't quite ready for it to end. There's so much potential baked into this little forgotten game made in large part by a staff of 5 people. I've never done this before, but I just had to get a physical copy of the game for myself even though I don't actually own a 3DO yet. I hope one day I can try it for real on a real 3DO machine though, pun intended. During all of this, I found a quote from one of the devs in an earlier video who explained that the Japanese version of the game was more complete since they had more time to work on it. Now, you've probably noticed some Japanese lettering in some of the footage of this video here, so as you may have guessed, I gave that version a go. It does run a lot better, has less glitches, huge improvements on the movement mechanics, especially strafing being so much better. The Japanese dub is recorded at a higher quality, it's a lot more interesting to listen to in my opinion than the English version, and even has a little reverb on the voices. If you've already played the English version once, I think the Japanese version is a great new way to play this game. And I don't understand Japanese, but I still prefer listening to the Japanese dub. I mean, tell me which one you'd rather listen to.
歴史上の激戦地をひっくるめたような最大で最悪の戦場さ。
I don't know, but when I find out, he's gonna be 6 feet under.
But unfortunately, that's where Immercenary's legacy ends. 5 Miles Out never made another game. While there's always a chance that it could come back, especially considering games that started on the 3DO such as Gex and Killing Time have made their way back to modern platforms, I think Immercenary has some pretty slim chances. Despite that, I've added my story on GOG's Dreamlist, so hopefully they can bring this game back via its preservation program. And I would really appreciate it if some of you all went in and voted after watching this video. I left a link down in the description. And also, I did reach out to Nightdive Studios because I'd absolutely die if they were to touch this game up with a remaster. I don't know if anybody else cares about this game or is going to care about it like I suddenly have, but Immercenary does things that few games today even attempt, and I hope you give it a try. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to share, but it involves spoilers related to the game's ultimate weapon, the final boss fight, and the build-up to the final boss fight. So if you don't want to see any spoilers, let me know what you think about Immercenary down below. Don't forget to give it a vote on GOG's Preservation Program, and as always, stay humble. I don't normally ever do spoilers, but I just had to talk about these final things because when else would I ever get to? Okay, spoilers in 3, 2, 1. The final weapon you'll find deep in the map of this game is called Nukia, and as the name implies, you can literally nuke the rhythms that stand in your way. It might honestly be my favorite screen clearing weapon of its type next to the BFG. This thing is insane, just look at this. Now, the build up to the final boss fight. Once you defeat the champions ranked 10 through 4, only Champion 3, Loki, is left, and Champion 2, Raven, the lady who reached out to you and kicked this whole thing off. You're told that not only do you have to defeat Loki, but Raven as well, because that's the only way you'll be able to get to Perfect 1. The mission then becomes to defeat Perfect 1 within 20 minutes so that the real-life Raven can be saved, since anyone who dies in this virtual reality will die in real life unless they can disconnect within 20 minutes. But again, due to those glitches, no one can. So in a roundabout way, you also learn that all of the rhythms that you've killed along your journey here, as well as the boss characters, were likely tied to real people that may no longer exist anymore. Oops. And the game does a complete tonal whiplash after that because, in a funny sort of meta way as far as I interpret it anyway, you fight Loki and Raven in none other than an EA Sports stadium. And I just think that's hilarious. Only Immercenary would do something so hyper-aware of its own absurdity. Following this, you face the final boss, with the music swelling against those jet black skies. The Oasis Spire is no more, it's just energy flowing endlessly into the sky, and the perfect world that you've spent all of this time in has crumbled all around you. Now, the final boss can take 3 different forms, apparently based on the decisions that you make in-game, and that's a female, a male, and the robot form that's on the cover. I was met with the female form, so it's hard to experience this or feel this unless you're actually playing the game yourself, but something Immercenary does that makes its combat quite visceral at times is when you encounter higher level enemies that just run straight at you. It never ceases to startle the crap out of me, and it gives me chills because they can just gun you down and then disappear in a flash. When you fight Perfect 1, this is turned up to 11 because they'll get right in your face and then run so far out into the darkness that they leave your line of sight completely, only to be illuminated in bursts by the lightning. The imagery of this fight has been burned into my brain, so memorable and effective even with its rather basic graphics by today's standards. Just imagine this fight remade with modern graphics. Oddly enough, I just played the Shadow of the Beast PS4 reboot prior to playing this game, so it was very easy for me to imagine this scene with graphics like this, and man, just take my wallet. I hope you see everything that I see here. I think this game is really special, and I'm trying to do my part to spread the word about it. Just one last reminder, I've got links in the description below if you'd like to go and vote for Immercenary as a candidate for GOG's Preservation Program. And Nightdive Studios, if you're watching, please give this game a go and see what you think. Maybe we can see this one in another form one day. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.